contributions to the general practice as well. However, um, the most interesting thing is she just asked me if she can take part in portrait, which honored me because she is not only the past president of RCGP, but also she's the past president of WONCA. WONCA is the World Organization of Family Doctors. So she was the possibly most inspirational GP in the world in between 2021 and 2023. So without further ado, it is an honor to have you here, Amanda. How are you?
Well, follow that if you can, as they say. Thank you very much, Gorkem and RCGP West Scotland. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for taking an interest in this. I Gorkem asked me to talk about my, academic GP life, and I guess what we're going to do is I'm going to tell you a bit about that story, those journeys, and then we'll have a discussion, and people can ask questions, of course. So when I think about this, I think, well, where did I start? And I would say when I was a kid, I wasn't pretty and I wasn't sporty, but I was quite bright. And I think my parents were the sort of people who encouraged that, reading at stuff at home, school, and my schools were good as well. And so I got the message that working hard with your brain was one way to go ahead to get, a good job, a good life. That was a message I got culturally. And also, I was thinking life was changing then for girls. So rather than, oh, you get married and you stop work, it was more like, why don't you go to university? And, and it was actually, again, one of my school teachers who said, you could apply for medicine. I wouldn't have thought of it. But, there people were beginning to change the way that women thought about their futures. And in fact, that was, as it turned out, what I chose because once I started thinking, well, it's a good job, everybody respects it, was the idea, but also, it matters to people and I can help people, and that mattered to me. And looking back, my 3 years at university were very academic because I went to Cambridge, and there we did lectures, tutorials, we read stuff, we had to write essays, we had to present evidence. It was very academic, but it wasn't at all about patients. I didn't see a patient for 3 years, except dead ones in the anatomy room. And the people who taught us were bioscience researchers, and there was no community stuff. I did do a bit of sociology, but that was an option, and most people didn't do that stuff at all. By contrast, my next 3 years as a clinical student, and indeed in GP training, were very practical, but they weren't academic at all. So it was really rare for anybody to say, go away and read this, or could you present some evidence for what you've just said? And all the, exams were memory tests or they were hands-on. So there were very mixed images to me about how much academic stuff really mattered once you'd got through your exams. And certainly there were a lack of role models or academics once I started doing practical work. And then the other bit that made that, if you like, worse was that by the time I was midway through med school, I'd already started thinking about being a GP. And I mean, there's a lot, I'll come back to some of that, but I'll tell you the culture. We didn't have any general practice. We had 1 week in 6 years and no GP teachers apart from that. And when I had a new personal tutor in my 4th year, who was a kidney specialist, and when he went round the group and asked us what we wanted to do when we were doctors, and I said I wanted to be a GP, he looked at my CV and he looked at me and he said, "Bright girl like you, Howe, that's a bloody waste." And although I disagreed with him, I got this message that if you were a GP and if you were a woman in medicine, you were saying, I don't want to do the really clever stuff. I don't want to go up the ladder. It was kind of like, well, that's it for your career. Um, is interested. And, you know, that being a GP just wasn't of interest to senior colleagues, really. So you would say, why did this clever girl choose it? And I think there were three main factors. As I said, the late 60s and 70s, when I was, becoming a student, being a student, were times of change. And if you look back at that, it was, the breakup of colonialism, the anti apartheid movement, the anti nuclear movement, feminism, turned into sort of gay pride and many other groups that were challenging the status quo. And although I came from a very conventional family, I think that experience of being a minority in medicine, women in medicine, with a lot of gendered experiences, kind of started me feeling a bit negative about the establishment. And so then I kind of made friends with people who had similar values. And the second thing that really influenced my choice of general practice was that I travelled abroad. I went to Africa and India and a couple of my holidays and electives. And I was really shocked by the lack of primary health care for people, which, I'd seen things on the telly, but actually the fact that the nearest clinic was 40 miles away, and, the only way to get there was bus, hitchhike, or a donkey. And then there were people in the village who had, really overt pathology. And I was just like, why doesn't the government sort this out? And my friend I was traveling with, he was a GP's son, and he gave me some really good lectures about how the NHS works, Amanda, and how you have to invest in this and all the different levels. And that's what the NHS does for us. And the GPs are the first line of medical care for people, etc. And that really kind of changed the way I thought about what GPs did. And then, although we didn't get it in the medical school, we kind of made time. I tried to find people who would show me what GP did, especially in deprived communities when I was a student in East London. And that sort of deepened my interest as well. So that's sort of the things that influenced me, but not academic influence, as you can tell. And then I did my
Hmm.
GP training and went into practice. And again, I was already committed to education. I really wanted students to come out of the hospital world and the science labs and see the people and see what health was about and see what the broader picture was about, because obviously I was doing the job then. And I still felt that was really important. And also, to be fair, mid 80s, a lot of stuff that used to be done in hospital was being done by us by then. And that's gone on, that change has gone on and on ever since. So the students couldn't even really learn medicine without being outside. But the medical school was still 3 weeks by then in the whole course. And we had students in my practice and we were training practice. And I started networking with people about, the medical course and a couple of GPs who were in the medical school anyway. The academic interface developed a bit because they were campaigning for the same thing, and they started getting GPs on campus. And I put my hand up for that. And we'll come back to what makes these things possible. But I guess my practice had the same values as me. And we
Mm.
had the message about GPs with a special interest, all of us having something that mattered to us and trying to support that and having flexible working conditions that made that possible if we agreed with the aim. And then once I got into the university stuff, suddenly that bit of my brain started coming back, and people were saying, well, maybe if you did a master's, it would help you to get onto the curriculum committees. And that would be great because then there'd be a GP, arguing about these things. And I
Hmm.
thought, well, I like that stuff, and I haven't been doing it for 10 years. So, one thing, my preferences as an academic person and the needs that I saw and the ways I might be able to influence things came round to me starting masters, going on to do a doctorate. And then the next jump was, a bit the same, really, that I was thinking I need to do a full academic post. But I'll pause there because I just want to remind people about what the academic options are, Gorkem, really, because there's more than one way to be academic in general practice. So
Hmm.
I don't know if Kirsty can show my first slide, just to give people a bit of a summary.
So
Yeah.
there are more than
That
one academic
doesn't
options.
matter.
So
Yeah.
one would possibly think that you would just go into the uni and start teaching the medical students.
But if you, so yes, so if you look at what formal academic posts are, next
Hmm.
bit, please. Can you show the first column? Yeah, lovely. So if you look there, that's what people think about. Those are the facts. You know, you've got to get a PhD. You have a formal academic contract that involves teaching and research, and you get a title like a lecturer, senior lecturer, prof. And there are some people who get what they call honorary titles later in their career because they, you know, adopted by the university. And there are some part-time contracts if you do a substantive piece of work at a university, but all those usually require some drop in clinical and a, you know, sort of change of status. But on the right-hand column, next column, of course, GPs also have other academic scope that don't require them to take up a university contract. If you do a master's, a lot of my colleagues sooner or later have done that to sort of add theory and competency to being an educator or having a special interest in something. If you teach students, whether on campus or in the practice, you're taking on an academic role. If you host research studies or you're involved in the research networks, which is really, really important for getting primary care evidence, and also, you know, doing projects yourself on quality improvement, evaluating what's happening in the practice, new initiatives, you know, data analysis, all those things are academic activities. And I think when we're talking about special interests, some people might want a contract, but some people will just sort of want to adopt some of that because it's good practice. And there's also, I put leadership and advocacy, and we can discuss that more later, but those are academic roles because you can't really do that well without having the evidence at your fingertips. But you've also got to be able to, you know, show where the gaps are and make the arguments. And a lot of that traditional Cambridge training taught us to debate, and that was, you know, helpful too. And if I could just have the next slide and get that summary over. And yes, somebody's asked, can we have the slides? And they'll be in the presentation, I think. So if you're just thinking, oh, well, I can't be an academic, I'm a GP. Well, don't say that, because providing you're keeping up to date with the evidence and you're using that in your working settings and you're doing those sort of quality improvement inquiries into things that do or don't seem to be working or you think you could be doing better, and going through cycles of change and evaluation, you're doing a scholarly job. That's an academic approach to practice, and let's not forget it and make sure that we're training our colleagues and our, you know, juniors to help with that. Next column. And I just put down a few examples I've seen, you know, again, in my own practices. I've been in 2 practices in my working lifetime, both for about 20 years in 2 different cities. And we've often found that alongside saying, well, who's the business partner, who's the GP trainer, who's the student education lead, who's the practice research lead, that can be really useful because somebody in the practice is the one who gets the request for research studies, who gets the request to join the network, who is sort of up to speed with the stuff that delivering research tries. And, you know, it can be, doesn't have to be the same person all the time, but it'll, you know, move around. And also, I think often if you've got learners in the practice, help getting them to help you to get up to date or learn something new, or getting them to do projects can be a very helpful way of getting input. CPD events, of course. And then also, you know, we've got a lot of evidence at our fingertips now, and we use it to give resources to patients. And I don't underrate that as an academic opportunity, because we're trying to give people the evidence on which to understand the problems they've got and make the decisions that they need to make. And I think good GPs do that, sort of pulling down a leaflet and sending it to people or to their daughter to help them to read something all the time. So that's a
Mhm.
sort of role modeling, isn't it? And using those wider networks. Thank
Yeah,
you, Kirsty.
that's
So we can come back to the full screen,
yep.
because my next bit is, so if there are all those ways to be academic, Amanda, why did you actually end up
Mhm.
reducing your practice commitment and becoming a full academic with much less patient care involved, like when I became a senior lecturer? Um, and that was really because by then, now we're in the mid 90s now, having been around the university world for a few years, and still trying to change the way the course worked, I realised that it was impossible really to have a voice at the table unless you were part of the university. And I was enjoying, again, I wouldn't have done it if I hadn't been enjoying the research side and enjoying the teaching challenges. But it was also about where I could have the most influence, if you like. So it was a combination of that, changing your career, which, I mean, face it, 40 plus years, it's good to have some changes sometimes. My kids were growing up, so I got a little bit of space. And I just sort of thought, well, if I get a job there, then they're going to have to include me. Now, to be fair, again, I'll make a joke. Even when I became a senior lecturer and I was in the formal curriculum committee for the MBBS on behalf of general practice, I was still probably the youngest or one of the youngest people in the room. I was the only woman and I was a GP. And I think that's what they call, isn't it? Intersectionality, where there are multiple disadvantages that add
Mhm.
up. But I was in the room and I
That's
had the evidence and I had my, arguments, and I was, by then much more confident that what we could do would improve education. There was another factor that really influenced the scope that I could have at that stage, which was a political change from the GMC, where
mm.
they similarly other people's voices to mine and the emerging evidence base had caused the GMC to say tomorrow's first edition or second edition of Tomorrow's Doctors, we need to have more community-based learning. So I could drum on that drum as well. So it wasn't just me, oh, Amanda would say that. Now they were saying, the dean was saying, oh, well, the GMC seems to think that Amanda may have a point, And so gradually we got another module and another module, and, the rest is history, I guess. Um, and then
No.
the other thing that happened was as I went up to those sort of national levels, and it was sort of senior levels, I was also going to conferences, meeting colleagues around the country in other medical schools. And a lot of people were involved at a level with the college, the RCGP, that I wasn't. I mean, I was always involved with my faculty and doing things there, but it was the people saying, well, we've got a research committee at the college, or, that we need to meet with the postgrad people about the curriculum. We can do that in the college committees. And so again, I got this message that there were other structures within the NHS and within the professional bodies that where actually, if you wanted to go the next level of change, that was another table that you needed to be sitting at. And the other
Mhm.
thing that tipped me there was colleagues, senior colleagues again, encouraging me, say, well, come to the committee with me and come and have a look at this. And, you know, I think they thought I was good enough to help, so I proved myself. But also, they were mentoring in a sense. They were giving me opportunities to try out that other world to see if my impression that that might be useful, their conviction that it might be useful, would play out. And so again, as I got to that level, I started looking around for or being given other opportunities that really helped. And the new medical school thing came up as well. So, and there was a long story cut short, I applied and went to University of East Anglia to work in a up and deliver a radically different model where our students, week one, year one, went to general practice. Yay, and kept on
Hmm.
doing that all the way through. So, really living the dream in some ways. And of course, there were many battles, and there were many glass ceilings, and there were many brick walls, and different views and things that one learns from over a lifetime. But I hope that that sort of shows that if you have commitment, clear values, you work hard, you do increase your own competency, and you win the respect of others, you can affect change. And the academic pathway is one of many ways that GPs can do that, and also have an interesting career themselves. So, um, if you want to show my third slide, Kirsty, which just shows some of the challenges and the facilitators that I've spelt out for people. Of course, it's tough to make the space, and there's always a lot of choice at any point in your life. And I often say to my mentees, you can't do it all at once. So, taking up a new role, doing a doctorate, one thing at a time, especially if you've got family and your practice, and you've got to do your clinical work properly as well. Getting support for those changes is really important. So doing them in a way that your practice thinks, I can see why Amanda wants to do that, and that's okay, or your family or others who know what the point is. I've talked a bit about social and political barriers. Well, that's a challenge. And then academic careers are very competitive. So actually, even if you're a really good researcher and you've got a really good idea, there's often only 1 in 4 or 5 grants that you'll get. And so, and promotions similarly. So it's not that formal pathway is not necessarily a straight run in, and finding the balance between all the different opportunities within those academic roles can also be a challenge. But the things that I think help, and these may run wider than academic careers, is, as I said, don't do it all at once. Use networks, try things out. You don't have to rush. If somebody's saying, oh, you'd be great on this committee and please apply, I would say, well, just before you ask me to apply, could I just come along? And then when you go and you think, I do not want to spend time here, and I do not think I would be able to use this, you politely decline. Or if you think, yeah, got it, can see why Yvonne's asked me to this, then you go. See what you're good at. And of course, try and surround yourself with people who will bring you on, and you can work together. You can't do this stuff alone, anything in this world, I don't think. Get advice, find mentors. And also, sort of inside, when you're not sure where to go, think, what do I really think matters now? What's going to be the best way to deliver the things that I really value, and keep trying. So that's sort of my key messages, Gorkem. I haven't talked yet about Wonka, but maybe we should pause there, and I can do the store international stuff, if people want me to.
I'm so interested into hearing that too. But before going to that, just to Wonka, you just provided a breathtaking a perspective for me, because you mentioned that the time was the time of the change. So it is not only that. So we always heard that it's not only what you know, it's who you know, it's your network as well. But you just provided me this perspective of when you live, and possibly where you live as well. So connecting to Wonka and the time of today, is the practicing GP as good as it was before? And
Yeah.
Being an
Well,
academic
we're
GP,
hearing,
is it better
yes,
today or worse in terms of the unis?
yeah. I think it's quite a complicated answer, but I think we have to acknowledge that we're hearing a lot of people feeling, stressed, burned out, that the situation's unstable, that the NHS has been underfinanced for a very long time. And certainly there's been of course, secondary care costs more, but still the bias, what primary care is expected to do for the cut of the budget that it's been receiving is kind of crazy. I think when I was younger, perhaps we were a slightly less critical audience, and perhaps there was less
Mhm.
collective wisdom. I think sometimes we put up with more than we should and we would now. I think the challenges of clinical practice, although a lot of new stuff that's really exciting helps us to give much better care than I could 30 years ago. And certainly the generation before me, who again had tried very hard but hadn't had specialist training, had no ability to organize resources, I mean, that's not a job I would really have wanted to do. I know one of my doctors said, I think I'm a nice doctor, but I'm not sure I'm a good doctor, senior colleague, because he'd
Mm.
never had the input. And we now have the advantage of, lots of CPD, lots of learning opportunities, good evidence that we can get at the touch of an internet button. But that adds its own complexity because there's always another question or another thing to read. And then I
Mm.
think the I loved the autonomy of being a GP, and I loved
Mhm.
being with the people, and I loved every patient being different, and I always felt that the hierarchy of hospital and the rigidity of organizations and the narrowness of some of it just wouldn't have worked for me at all. But the price that we pay for being more autonomous is that every practice can constantly be reconfiguring itself, trying to decide how the team should work, looking at the money, what should we spend the money on, and it gives you the price of that autonomy is that you have to take a lot of responsibility for it.
Mhm.
And again, what do we know? Well, there are debates about the contract, debates about partnership, debates about how to get a good, flexible working project.
Yeah.
But to be fair, I've seen very good examples in general practice of how things can work. And I think, times are tough. The underfinancing, the political stuff, the general angst, I think there's an old fashioned term called existential angst. I think there's a lot of that layering in for everybody. And, you know, we absorb some of that as GPs and primary care staff because we are very close to how the people feel, and people can express their frustration to us in a way that they might not in a more hierarchical setting. But that means sometimes we feel that we're not doing enough, which we usually are. So I think I think objectively, the care that GPs give now to people is fantastic. And it's much better than it was when I started practice. But I think subjectively, people often feel they don't feel how much they do because of all the other stuff that's coming at them all the time.
So there is hope. So,
Yeah, I
by the
hope
way,
so. And I mean,
yeah.
the international stuff, again, when, like when I was in Africa all those many years ago, me suddenly
Hmm.
thinking, you know, wow, the NHS is really special.
Hmm.
I probably wouldn't have, talking of academic stuff, I probably wouldn't have been born with the brain I've got if my mother hadn't had NHS midwifery and medical care in a difficult pregnancy. So,
Hmm.
all that stuff is hugely important. And when you go to countries where people still don't have it,
Hmm.
you do value it and really think we need to hold on to this and invest in it properly, especially in the community and primary care level. And that's
Hmm.
actually what, the Wonka stuff often attracted me about, because, I thought general practice really mattered here. And then I was meeting colleagues in some countries who were saying, well, we don't even have specialty training, and we're really trying to have to fight that corner. And what Wonka tries to do is to share learning across different professional, or, GPs around the different European countries, around the different regions, and also to advocate for a health system that has comprehensive, effective, efficient primary care with GPs at the heart of it, because we know that, again, that helps. And a lot of countries draw on us through Wonka. We draw on each other to share that learning. So that was the other thing that got me excited there, because I felt, well, we've won some battles this side of the ocean, but my colleague in, Uganda is fighting the battle that I saw being fought 30 years ago. So, etc.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. Um, you know what I did, Amanda? As the host of the portrait, I forgot to give like some housekeeping things. I have to just do it now.
And I've just noticed that one of my key initial mentors, who made a lot of my career possible, is on the call, David Hannay. So
Ah.
he knows what I'm talking about. Anyway,
Well,
go on. Sorry.
so then I can possibly announce that. So we will be able to ask the questions just, from now on. So if you have any questions, please fire away. And so I'll be just asking, a lot of questions. I have lots of questions to Amanda, but so your views and reviews are much important than mine at the moment, because I think I will see Amanda again after this as well, because she is a mentor in RCGP, and I'm hoping that I will just see her again too. Um, so in terms of the housekeeping as well, we will be recording this session, and it will be available. Whoever registered to this portrait webinar series, we will be emailing them the recording of the session. In terms of the slides, you will be able to see the slides over there too. Yeah, so Amanda, it is extremely interesting perspective, and so involvement with faculty has led you to give you extra avenues to explore, and I cannot agree more, because it is just it changed my life too, involving with my faculty board. And I've been a representative, just a representative initially, and then I met inspirational people, and then we just gone through the meetings, webinars, seminars, and then we start talking about symposiums and conferences. So throughout your career, do you have any turning point that you said, after that symposium, after that conference, do you think that the faculty was the turning point for you?
You know, one of the things that I often remember is that the Sheffield faculty made a special arrangement to meet the people who joined the GP training scheme. And particularly because I changed cities to go to that training scheme, that really impressed me. The fact that there were GPs in the city who wanted to meet us because they were really glad we wanted to be GPs. And my faculty, and that faculty again after that was often, you know, let the young doctors have a bit of a headway, so we went to them, and we weren't very keen on doing the CPD events with the drug companies all the time, and we said, could we do some ourselves, just run some things for ourselves? And the faculty said, yes, we'll help you to do that. Like, my faculty encouraging the first 5 to design its own CPD events and giving that some support and so on. And it was actually the administrator of the Sheffield faculty who sent me the job advert for the first time David Hannay managed to get GPs to teach on campus. So if she hadn't sent me that in my busy life, I might, not have known that it was being advertised, and that could have been a big difference. And then similarly, as I said later, colleagues who met me in the academic world and were saying, oh, we need people on this committee and that committee. And I'd always seen the college as a friend, and certainly going with one of the professors to be on the research committee and then chairing that and so on. So I don't know um, if that's one turning point. The other one, and I won't talk in too much detail, but in another way, there was another big turning point when something got blocked that we'd been working on for a long, long time, and we thought it was all going really well, and we built up the networks and the momentum and the arguments, and we thought this was going to happen. And then it got blocked by a bit of the NHS sort of outside the university. And you can all learn from your mistakes, but that was the one where I sort of came home saying, oh no, this isn't going to happen, and we've worked so hard on it. And in my inbox was the advert for the UEA job, again sent to me by a colleague, saying, you were interested in, well, look, this job's up. And so sometimes fate does feel like, the card just fell into the right time. But again, I think if I hadn't had those networks, if I hadn't been, as it were, portraying myself to be open to those opportunities, and having the people in the networks to think of me when they came up, it wouldn't really have happened. So it feels like fate, but actually a
Yeah.
lot of the building bricks were in it already.
Yeah. So being in the right time in the right place, and as you said, like knowing the people. There's a question about finances related to payment and careers in academia from Amy. Amy, do you want to come in and ask the question?
Yeah, that would be great if that's possible. Can you hear me
Yes,
okay?
yes, please, fire away.
Perfect. Well, first of
Hi.
all, thank you so much for, hello, thank you so much for a fantastic talk. That was really inspiring. I've really enjoyed tonight. My question is I'm probably approaching this from a very different perspective to a lot of people here, but I thought it's probably a question that's perhaps taboo that we don't talk about. So I thought here might be a good place to ask it, if that's okay. So I retrained from being a surgeon to a GP after my PhD. And I had quite a big role in academia. I was a chief examiner. I've been an external examiner. I'm also in the reserves and I write a lot of papers in there. Now I'm at a point that I'm just finishing my GP training and trying to think about how to combine academic roles with general practice roles. And I've been approached by quite a lot of academic institutions asking me to lead modules, asking me to teach their master's students, asking me to do this, that, and the other. And it's always as an honorary contract. And I think if you're a hospital-based consultant, it's much easier to place that honorary contract into your career and perhaps allow one day of your paid work to go to that. But I'm finding it quite difficult to understand how that would work in general practice. So it seems very much that if I were to do that, it would be doing it kind of off my own back, especially as an honorary lecturer, unless I move away from clinical work and get a substantive contract. So I'm just wondering if you have any tips, any advice, any thoughts, being from a position of somebody that's managed this really well.
Yes, although thank you, Amy. Although I think the devil's in the detail, and I'm just going to clarify one thing: the word honorary. So that means you're linked to the university, but you're only doing the sessional payment sort of thing. Is that what it means?
Well, the few universities that have approached me by honorary, they mean unpaid.
Ah, exactly. So I referred early on to that thing about people being given titles because people wanted to draw them in. Um, I am now an honorary professor because I'm retired, and that's a title that the university give me to appreciate the work that I did and to keep me tied in with them, as it were. But in every other setting, I would say that an honorary title is really a voluntary role. And, if you feel that you're going to get some additional, as it were, lightweight opportunities and networks and things that may lead to something else, okay. But all the things I did, including the one right at the beginning of my career, were paid sessions. So at UEA, just like Sheffield, if you went to campus and you did a half a day of teaching, you were paid. And you might sort of think, oh, well, I could have earned more doing BOTOC somewhere else, but that's a different question. You know, you make the choice of the thing that matters to you. The clinical academic contracts, if you get a senior lecturer role, as you know, if you did that before, are paid at a clinical rate, which can feel quite harsh to people who are doing similar jobs who aren't clinicians. But, you know, that the point is to not stop people getting academic roles if they're doctors, because, you know, and then the other question is how your practice works. So my funny practice in Sheffield had a thing where if you worked, whatever role you worked in, the money came into the practice, and if the practice had agreed you could do it, you were paid at the same sessional rate. So my day a week at the university was paid as the same as my day in the practice, and the money that came in from that role came into the practice, and the one that was a better paid job at the local factory came into the practice, and the one that was the worst paid job somewhere else also came in. So practices can even it up if they're committed to the different roles, or you don't, you know, you say, right, well, I'm only available for 3 days a week and I'm going to do a day a week at the university. But if you're teaching, you know, or doing research with somebody, I think you should be getting money. So I'd look very, well, I can see you are looking at that. And I think the only virtue is if that then opens other opportunities or networks for you and makes your CV look better, honorary is fine. But I'd put a caveat on it. I agree.
Thank
Does
you. I
that
really
help?
do appreciate it. It does.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I think that's a contemporary problem that's more that most of the GPs with special interests are having at the moment. Especially on my case, I'm a GP with special interest in sports medicine. We rarely are paid well enough as we are like, you know, working in our general practice. But you just go and do it just for your own mind, if that makes sense. And even if you do it for your own mind, the in the companies, they do not pay for it. So basically you're taking a lot of risk to it, or you have to self-indemnify it, like, you know, yourself, so that it is just quite a lot of investment that we are doing as general practitioners at the moment. However, with the recent 10-year programs that we have for the future, NHS 10 years programs are possibly valuing more GPs having special interests, working in line with the LMC, local medical committees or local negotiation committees. If you can possibly convince them, you could possibly find a way around while being paid, so you can get the thing that you want. Because I have a friend who is the first 5 lead of all UK, Toyosi. She's doing endoscopies. I don't know how she got it, but so this is a very interesting career for her, and there are a lot of GPs doing that, and we will possibly be inviting them in this portrait webinars. How did they manage to link their career with their hobbies or the things that they wanted to do? Amanda.
The other thing I would say is that, of course, there's always some part, I think, in people's lives where you are doing things in your own time without the money. So again, David will remember when I did my doctorate, that I got a lot of support from the department, supervision, and, you know, even help with the research, which was amazing because they were, you know, trying to invest in people like me. But I did all my stuff in my own time, and there was another colleague in the department, and we used to, you know, compete for how late we stayed up in our studies after we'd done the clinical and put the kids to bed, and then we still had to look at our research for the next day or whatever. So I think if you are committed to a career, you're always going to do things that aren't
Yes.
reimbursed. But if you're doing a job, you should be reimbursed for it, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, Amy. It was one of my questions, so I have one last question to ask Amanda now. So about you just gave invaluable tips. I'm really wondering that did you get any scholarships during your training, or did you apply for it? And how was the application process? Because you mentioned that it is difficult to get one. And so is there any opportunities in terms
Yes,
of in general practice at the moment, or in
I
academia?
actually don't think I can answer that very well, Gorkem, because since I retired a couple of years ago, I'm not really following that. But also, I will say that it's very situation specific. So, you know, we've seen example the in practice fellowships that people were being able to use to develop additional, you know, opportunities in their first 5 years. Now, those in England have just been transferred to the ICBs, and it's, you know, some of them are using them differently. And I think the what is available locally is often very variable. There are some national scholarships or international scholarships, but you know, your best way to find out about those, if you are looking for something like that, is either just to go online or talk to your local academic units who'll be much more up to speed with that. The college has a few awards and grants. The research committee still has some startup grants for people getting involved with the research world. So there are small pots of money like that. And then often people end up, I mean, I've had, you know, huge challenges getting younger colleagues who are very eligible to do PhDs. Again, the PhD funding stuff can be very competitive. And often people end up, you know, choosing something because there's a project available that's got some money and will give them the PhD training, rather than being able to find money for the project they'd really, really like to do as an original project. So I'm not being very helpful. And the short answer is you have to do quite a lot of homework, get quite a lot of advice on it. And I don't think I ever had anything like that, but I did have the practical support to do my doctorate, which otherwise, you know, would have made it impossible. So sometimes you get scholarships in kind, which is what I had in Sheffield, rather than in cash.
No, that's really valuable. So the executive managers always says that there is the thing that you are the summary of the 5 people that are around you in your network, the closest people, definitely. And you found like-minded people, and just, you know, you just step up. Federico has just raised a hand. Federico, do you want to come in and ask a question?
Hello.
You're on mute.
Hi.
And yeah. Hi.
Sorry. Hi. Thanks for that very interesting talk. I think I missed it because I joined like 5 minutes late. I was just wondering what your doctorate was in, and then personally, or well, academically, I guess, what do you think has been a very interesting development of primary care research in the past few years?
Oh, well, I can answer the first easily. It was in the factors that impacted on the recognition of psychological distress in the consultation. So I was always interested in mental health in a sort of broadest spectrum, and the engagement with patients' emotions and insights into how they handled their lives and the illnesses they had and so on. And it seemed to me, and the literature was showing, that there were very different levels of people engaging with that as GPs, or even, you know, then detecting depression or making a sort of formal diagnosis. And, you know, the study we did was to look at the match between patients doing a questionnaire and talking about anyway, you can read it because that was my first sort of publication. So it was a very GP project, but it, you know, fitted into a realm. Now, what do I think is interesting in the recent world? Well, again, I think this is gives us a good point, because we're generalists. You know, there's lots of different fields of research. There's clinical research, there's therapeutic research, there's public health research, there's psychological health, there's empowerment research. There's, I did a whole body of work with some amazing colleagues at UEA on the impacts of public and patient involvement in research and how to get effective voices into that weren't just, token gestures. So I think there are many new discoveries in many different spheres. And then you can parallel that in the rest of the world, can't you? So the whole epigenetics stuff and, mammoth and mice and, oh, don't start me. But yeah, I mean, the things that sometimes most interest me are the things that in another way are not the ones that get multi-million-pound grants or even become very famous. They're often those studies about, what having a community health worker in your practice does that's different, and looking at evaluating that across the practices that have them and showing an innovative model of the modern primary care team that might make a real difference to how we work across the boundaries and, answer some of our issues about unmet need that then becomes a knock-on into the practice. So I guess my health services research, and particularly at the end of sort of social and organizational interventions, are some of the places that I get excited when I still open the journals. But I wouldn't want to say that that's the most important work that primary care has done. The college gives prizes each year to the research paper of the year and so on, and those are also, they're always good. They also show us the enormous range of people's successes, if you like. Does that help? I don't know.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. I think it makes me wonder how much. It's interesting. I think that you've done also like this role that you described, spanning between academic research and Wonka, and the types of paper that sparked your interest that you're talking about. Do you think the academic output of primary care is reflective of the values of primary care in different countries? Have you found? I'm not sure if maybe liaising with other colleagues through Wonka, you found different things. I make an example. Maybe I'm doing a fellowship in rural health, and I'm trying to do a small snapshot study about MDT integration in rural Scotland and in Norway. And it's quite interesting because I'm finding that in Scotland, this integration has been very successful, but actually in Norway, no, it hasn't. And they say, actually, we felt better with just, doctors and nurses. So I was just wondering if you'd encounter something like that in your career.
Great questions. Now I'm going to just try and capture that. In terms of academic careers, I tend to see that there are two pathways, actually. There are people like me that, yes, I have been an active researcher and I've been good enough for my university. There's a terrible thing called the research assessment exercise. And if you're an academic contract, you have to be returned in the ref to be considered, ticking the box. And I always was. But I was not the professor of general practice who got the recurrent multi-million-pound grants and built up a huge research unit. So I played my role and fulfilled my, potential as a researcher as on, multi-team grants. But the other colleagues who I won't name, but, people will know some of them, around the country and indeed abroad, they did research. They didn't go and become a college officer. They didn't become president of Wonka or the college. They just kept here and did a great job at that. Again, we have more than one model. Abroad, I noticed really that a lot of the initial innovation for family medicine in countries where it was still growing was often linked with university. Often the first chip in had come through a university, had come through a medical school, and the academics, where the primary care GP training was growing, were being hosted by the universities and the medical schools. So I think, again, that opportunity for change through academic general practice was mirrored in quite a lot of my experience abroad. Because I guess they were training the workforce and producing the evidence for the health systems. And so people were emerging there who were then adapting general practice. And actually, final little anecdote, if I may, one of my colleagues in one place, general practice was first really encouraged in her country by a diabetologist. So they had no GPs in the country and didn't get it. And then he, because he was doing international work and international research, came to, I think, the US and the UK. And we're like, wow, look at what early community-based diabetes intervention and ongoing chronic care does. We haven't got that. We need that in my country. And so he also became an advocate for the specialty, even though he wasn't a GP himself, because he saw the value of it in another health system. And so I think the international academic sharing of evidence and experience can also be a very powerful tool for change, and is mirrored in Wonka, really.
Thank you.
Not that Wonka is a very academic organisation on the whole, it's GPs, it's not, but a lot of the leads in countries are linked with the medical schools or using them in the way that I described.
Yeah, so I'd like to connect to that, Federico. Thank you for the the question. So, um, you might hear, like, in the past we possibly heard that there's nothing much to be left that to be found. No more research is needed. So we just heard that in the past about the medicine as the human body and etc. And possibly we're hearing about these kind of stuff in general practice too. So just do your job, do not like invest in academia and etc. I do not believe that. Do you hear these kind of comments? And if you do, and if you, I by heart, I know that you don't agree with them. And what do you think in general practice, the most exciting avenue to do the research on?
Well, I think the first part of the expression is often, a mirror of burnout or frustration. People feel totally overwhelmed and they can't possibly take on another thing. And then if you suddenly come and say, I'm the research lead. No, there's this really interesting project that the university have just asked us to be involved in. And the business partners going like, no, no, no. That's a dynamic that we have to address in practice, whatever the frustrations and the overwhelming and so on. So in terms of what academic involvement can do for a practice, and there is definitely evidence that practices that teach students and postgraduates and that host research, that is often aligned with a good quality of care. So it may be that the practices who are struggling less can deliver those extra things, but it often also means you've got that refreshment, that bright young third year ST3 who comes in and says to the senior partner, and I think we'd have to give her this, and the senior partner's thinking, have I heard of that drug? Well, you learn something from the ST3, etc. And then in terms of what the most exciting research is, I think often research practices will just do it because somebody thinks it's worthwhile. But I found that the practices got excited about things that they felt were really relevant to the job they were delivering. So whether it was a new intervention for diabetes or whether it was a new way of running the appointment system and using a digital system, and people saying, we want to evaluate this because we want to maximize the efficiency of the digital health opportunities and minimize the inefficiencies. And we know practices are finding they haven't got. So we want to do some research on this, guys, to tell you in the longer run what are the efficient ways of using the system for you and for the patients. And people will say, snap your hand off, because we really need an answer to that question. So I
Yeah.
think, you know, that's one example. And I've got two young colleagues in the UK, one of whom is, you know, from another country, but she's working here at the moment and, you know, doing exactly those kind of research studies. And I think they're getting a very good uptake because they make sense to the guys at the front line.
Yeah.
Just an
Thank you.
example, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I have more questions about academia, but I want to just touch base on the leadership roles that you had as well. And I do ask that a little bit with curiosity, just not me, but maybe one of us in the audience might be very interested in such a role of being the president of RCGP or Wonka. So, what were the most rewarding aspects of leading these organizations?
Was
So we know
meeting
that, right? So
colleagues.
you just lift your head above the parapets. Yeah.
Sorry. But it was the most interesting thing, and the thing that will stay with me forever was the joy of meeting colleagues. You know, the
Mhm.
more the networks, the conferences, the speaking opportunities, the visits, the meetings, you know, meeting colleagues, all ages, all stages, all different worlds, you know, it was just fabulous. And that's, you know, in a sense, the benefit of shared humanity with common interests and common values that bring you together. But also, you know, like you're kind enough to ask me here, and people are saying, "Oh, thank you, that's interesting, well done." You know, you feel like you do when you've seen a load of patients. You think, "Well, I think I helped, you know, a few people today, and I'm really glad that they asked me to do that." So the opportunity to help others, to support others, to continue along the challenging journeys that they were already undertaking, I think
Mhm.
is the general thing. And you can apply that actually at lots of levels, but for me, it was that the things that were, of course, challenging were that you're always thinking, particularly in the college, where it's more, you know, you're trying to deliver the model for the colleagues, you know, there's all the complexity, you know, how do you make the right decisions? How do you decide to prioritize? What are the needs? What's the political context? You know, how much can we make sure that we're again effective and efficient as an organization, giving the members what they need, advocating effectively? You know, there are plenty of challenges. And I think certainly the skills of leadership and advocacy are things that I think are worth reading about and learning about, whatever level of GP you're in. Because when I started looking at those literatures and doing learning events, I kind of found a whole load of labels for things that I hadn't previously been able to understand. And it really helped me to then sit in difficult meetings and think, that's what's going on there. And I must try this tactic, you know, like making a difficult diagnosis, but it's a different setting. So I think there were certainly challenges, and any big organization, you know, you can be called president, but you're not in control of it. I
Mhm.
promise you. And why should you be? It wouldn't be appropriate for one person to rule the whole thing. But I maybe am rambling now. We're over an hour in, so I think I've lost your point. Did it answer that?
No, it definitely answers that. So
Okay.
it definitely answers that because a part of it just coming together with the with the peers and learning from them, and it definitely takes you to another level and influences basically all of us, especially in our faculty board, to take the general practice to a different level. And I think we did that in West of Scotland, and we keep doing it. So that's great, and having that uh, capabilities under your belt, like having the PhDs and fellowships, that will definitely teach you and give you another avenue to just basically give you extra stuff to help other people as well. Throughout your career, then, um, if you were about to starting just new, and when you just look back at your career, where would you begin? and how would you choose your path? And could you possibly share possibly like 3 essential steps that um, that we should be taking for a career like yours? I know it is difficult to summarize, but
The 3 steps, but I will just say one thing.
Mhm.
I did not enter medical school intending to be the president of Wonka or the college.
Mm.
Absolutely not. You know, so I think maybe one of the key things is to try to choose the things that are right for you and to find out what the choices are. So to, you know, make sure you know what the choices are, even if they don't match the immediate opportunity you've got. So, like, you know, we're talking about academic careers, and you think, well, could that suit me? How would I know? When would I start to get involved with it? Because right now, practice is busy, I've got young children, whatever. So, think about within what you know about yourself, the sorts of things that are going to suit you, match your values, maybe match the spaces you've got. Again, you know, I go back to the beginning, the academic side, you know, I could recognize that in myself when I started to interact with it again. And friends were saying, you know, well, I'm doing this, and, you know, maybe you could do that. And I was thinking, oh, that sounds really interesting. If you'd said to me, come and do, you know, don't know what, I won't give an example because it'll sound derogatory, but, you know, some things I knew straight away I would never take that path up. So you have to think what would work for me, and then make sure that you know, in a sense, how to get there. Because, you know, you might maybe start the building blocks, finding out about it, seeing if it suits you, then get into the 3, 4, 5 years of doing the doctorate or whatever to get that stage over, and doing it while you're doing clinical. So, yeah, look at the options and think about what might work for you and test it out. That's one step, if I can pull that one together. The second one is, I think, be competent at what you do. So people don't come to you and ask you to join things or encourage you to do other stuff if they don't think you're very good. And if they think, you know, the practice isn't going to support you to go off and have a day a week doing X, if they think you're already under delivering for them. So I think competence at the roles you've taken on, including family life, you know, I think we've got to deliver on what we're already committed to prove to others that we're worth supporting for another stage. And, you
Yeah.
know, if you don't do one job well, or, you know, of course, if you think it's because of the circumstances, then you don't do it, blah, blah. But you see what I mean? That people generally don't get to progress in a career or be mentored or be given new opportunities if people look at them and say, well, she didn't deliver on the last couple of things, so why should she deliver on this one? So
Yes.
look ahead, deliver on what you've got now. And then I think, you know, understand that not everything is under our control. You know,
Mhm.
things could easily have not turned out the way mine did. And there are many, you know, acts of fate, illness, politics, stuff that disrupts. So do your best, but don't necessarily feel to blame if things don't always work out. Try and learn from the things that go wrong by, if you had another scenario like that, how would you avoid that? But, you know, resilience, what is it? You know, it's commitment, but it's also pragmatism, you know.
Mhm.
Nothing goes right all the time. We're not perfect, the world's not perfect. You just do your best.
Thank you so much. Yeah. That's I think what we all will be trying to do. And so do you, if
And
we
help
have
each
any other
other is the other
questions?
thing.
Sorry?
Now my voice is going now, so I just get some more water. But, you
Okay.
know,
So, why did you get water? So, and I'll just do an outro. So, well, we had Amanda today, and Amanda was very kindly answering all the questions that possibly I was wondering, and some of our colleagues were wondering. And this is going to be sent as a video to everyone who registered and who couldn't attend, so that everyone knows what is the academic careers and what is, available to the GPs who are planning to do more than just seeing patients in their GP practices. This is possible, and Amanda made it possible. Amanda changed the pathway of the general practice, not only being in RCGP and Wonka, but also being in the university, and changing the lives of the medical students, giving them the influence or inspiration to become general practitioners, possibly. So thank you so much, Amanda. And you were saying something, it was just interrupted. Do you want to complete that?
No, not really. I think I'd said it. It was fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay. Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for attending tonight's portrait webinar. And please keep in touch. We will be texting and emailing you the recordings, and if you are in the email chain, we will be letting you know about the future portrait webinars as well. Amanda, again, thank you so much for being here, inspiring us, and basically you just made things possible for us, because you made it so you made it look so easy. So I think I can possibly do that too. I'm so enthusiastic at the moment, not only with my GP career, but also having this partnership and everything on the go. So thank you so
Well,
much.
I thank you very much for having me. And I always feel really encouraged when I see other people, younger GPs trying, trying to find the right ways to go forward. It's
Mhm.
just great that, that's what makes us thrive, and survive. And so it's very rewarding for me if I've been of any help to you at all. And together we'll all hopefully go forward. So thanks.
Exactly. Thank you ever so much. And thanks everyone for attending, and
Hello, Michael.
see you later.